Hello and welcome back to another episode of Chrono Royals. Let me start today by asking the questions so many people are asking all over social media platforms. Why hasn't King Charles stripped Prince Andrew of his kingdom? Why is Andrew still on the royal website? Why does Sarah Ferguson, Fergie, still use the title Duchess of York after this infamous Epstein email calling him a supreme friend? If titles are such a privilege, why is it so impossibly hard to take them back? Believe me, I hear your frustrations, and I am frustrated too at times. And honestly, in this era of cancel culture, where one scandal can ruin a career overnight, it feels unbelievable that royal titles remain untouchable. But the answer is not as simple as it looks, my friend. It is not indecision either. In fact, it reminds me of a scene from a series that I've watched, and I'd like to share that with you so we may both understand what is going on. Okay? So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive in to today's topic: punishment. Alrighty, let's go ahead and dive right in. As I've said, the answer is not as simple as it looks, and it's not about being indecisive either. In fact, it reminds me of a scene from the series Versailles, precisely season 2, episode 8. It is a scene that I've watched over and over. Actually, it's a series that I've watched over and over and over. I don't know how many times, and I still can't believe Netflix is not bringing back this series. I mean, this is a really good series. And see, instead of putting good shows like this on, they cancel those and then they bring on Meghan Markle. Oh my goodness. Anyway, that's a story for another day. However, let's go back to this, okay? I'd like for us to watch this particular clip together, and then I'll tell you why it matters. Because again, it is a scene I've watched over and over because it explains so much. And while all of this drama and all of this scandal with Fergie and Andrew is going on, somehow in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I wonder why King Charles is not taking any major steps into punishing these two. And then I thought about it for a couple days, and it suddenly dawned on me. I was suddenly reminded of this particular scene. And so let's go ahead and watch it together, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. So let's watch it.
Someone tried to poison me while I worshipped God.
I am innocent.
Innocent. Yet you procured poison.
It was a mistake. I did not go through it.
And the heretic priest, Etienne Guibord, a satanic mass. The blood of a child spilled.
No, I could never do such a thing.
But you went to see him. Admit it!
Everything I did for you. All I wanted.
Enough! I gave you my heart, my soul, my love. That love has died.
It cannot die. I made you who you are. I made you complete. I cannot live without you. You cannot live without me.
That was true once. But not now. Without you, I am myself.
I will leave. If that is what you want. You will never hear from me again.
No. You will remain here at Versailles, an anonymous noble without the king's favor. That will be your punishment. To bear the guilt and shame forever. You will leave behind the life you once led. You will attend prayers and mass. You will neither drink nor gamble. You will be known for your piety and your humility.
You condemn me to death.
The Marquise de Montespan, who had the world and the King of France at her feet, no longer exists.
So, what did you think? Now, if you don't know who that woman was, let me give you a little bit of the backstory. Madame de Montespan, also known as Athénaïs de Montespan, was not just another mistress. She was the mistress, the true queen of Versailles. She had the ear of Louis XIV. She shaped court fashion, politics, and culture. She was adored, feared, and envied. She was the brightest star in the Sun King's orbit. She even had children with him. Even if they were illegitimate, she had children with the king. But you see, her power came with enemies. And when the king's eye began to wander towards Madame de Maintenon, who is the lady that is also in this scene at the very far back, that's the new mistress, okay? That was the new mistress. And so when the king's eyes began to shift towards Madame de Maintenon, who was also herself previously to Madame de Montespan's governess, okay? She was the governess to Madame de Montespan's children with the king, okay? And so Madame de Montespan, she sensed her influence slipping. And that is when desperation crept in, okay? And according to both history and the dramatization in the series Versailles, Madame de Montespan turns to dark arts, love potions, whispered curses, and finally poison. In this particular chilling episode, King Louis was about to drink from a goblet of wine at Mass, and that goblet had been poisoned by Madame de Montespan. And it was Fabien, who is the king's investigator and bodyguard, who uncovered the plot in time. So that was the last straw. The scandal exploded into what we know as the affair of the poisons, and Louis acted decisively. He stripped her of her apartments, her privileges, her influence, right? But here's the cruel brilliance. He did not exile her, despite her offering exile for herself. She said, "I will leave if that is what you wish." And he's like, no, you know? So he did not exile her. He left her at court, visible but irrelevant, a queen of shame. Eventually, she retreated to a convent later on, where she lived out the rest of her days, marked by eternal disgrace. But that is the story, okay? And how brilliant that is. I mean, what a brilliant punishment What a poetic punishment. That scene to me was like, oh my God, really, like, how horrible to do this to a person, to make them feel so ashamed in plain sight, how to make them so irrelevant in plain sight, especially at court. You know, I mean, you're talking Versailles, you're talking the grandeur of Versailles, you're talking the Sun King, the most celebrated mistress of all time at Versailles, now reduced to shame in plain sight, you know, reduced to nothing, okay? So let's zoom out, okay? Let's zoom out of this and let's go back into today's time, okay? Because this is where the parallel matters, okay? This is where it all matters. You see, King Charles obviously is not the Sun King. King Charles is not Louis XIV. He cannot rule by decree. He's not an absolute ruler. He cannot wake up one morning and strip Andrew of his dukedom or erase Fergie's title. Those titles are legal creations bound into centuries of law. Removing them requires Parliament, a threshold historically reserved for treason or siding with Britain's enemies, not scandal. So, what does King Charles do? He follows the Versailles method. He follows the King Louis XIV's method. He reduces Andrew to a title in name only. No roles, no patronages, no military honors, no HRH. He's a ghost of the Duke of York, and actually the Queen did that. The King Charles didn't even have to do it. The King did it herself. So kudos to the Queen, okay? Now, Fergie, she still carries the title, of course, Duchess of York, despite having been divorced since 1995 or 1996. And if you think about it, her reputation has been left to collapse on its own. Charities already cut ties after the whole Epstein email resurfaced. Okay, the crown did not even have to swing the axe. Society did. The people, us, you, me, everyone else did. The king didn't have to lift a single finger. You see, exile lets you reinvent yourself. Exile lets you write your own narrative, to become a martyr or whatnot. It gives you a chance to sell a comeback story. But irrelevance suffocates. It forces you to live with what you have lost, day after day, in plain sight. It's the Versailles treatment in a constitutional age, pretty much. Leave them inside the palace of history, but hollowed out. That's basically it. So when people say, why not just take it all away? Remember Madame de Montespan, once the most powerful woman at Versailles, reduced to irrelevance, humiliation, and a convent in time. Not because Louis cut her out, but because he left her to linger in shame in front of courtiers, in front of society, okay? And today, Andrew and Fergie live a modern version of that fate. Present, but powerless. Visible, but irrelevant. Titles that exist, but mean nothing. Nothing, nada, rien du tout, niet. So, I'll ask you, is that enough? Or should Parliament make it easier to remove titles when disgrace reaches this level? Tell me what you think in the comment, and tell me what you think of Madame de Montespan's punishment. And you know, the thing is, history is not just repeating itself. It is explaining itself. And I keep saying, if you look back on history, it teaches us so much. And you know, the monarchy, the institution, despite us being in the 21st century, the monarchy remains resolute and absolute, that is as it's always been. Certain things may change, certain things may modernize, but the psychology of monarchy, that hasn't changed. Not a whole lot anyway. Here's proof. This punishment Madame de Montespan suffered and was subjugated to live the rest of her life. Fergie and Andrew are living that exact same fate. Will live that exact same fate. So if I were you guys, I wouldn't sweat it so much. And, you know, like I said, if you guys can take it all the way up to Parliament to do it, sure. If Parliament decides to, you know, remove them, then of course the king will have no choice but to sign off on it. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think Parliament's too worried about that. They're far more worried about other things out there, I believe. So that brings me to the conclusion of today's commentary and analysis on what is punishable, what is a good form of punishment. And the answer, my friend, is to be irrelevant in a world that is completely out of reach for both of them nowadays. All right, this brings me to the end of today's commentary, and I know that perhaps this may not be the best answer to the questions you are probably wondering about, but it makes sense. It totally makes sense. And if I look at things in this particular angle, well, then sure, I'm satisfied in some way, because I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really bother me none that Fergie keeps the title. I mean, or that Andrew keeps the title. It doesn't change my life in any way. I'm still gonna get up and go to work and do my things on a daily basis. I mean, you know, it doesn't really change my life, but it certainly changes theirs, you know. So to me, that's good enough. I don't really need a whole lot more than that. Again, like I said, unless Parliament decides to surprise us, or the monarchy, the institution, decides to surprise us by a brand new, unprecedented action, then sure, we'll see what happens then. But until then, nah, there's not much anybody can do. We can scream all we want. We can yell all we want. We could point fingers at the monarchy all we want, at King Charles all we want. But it really, you know, doesn't do anything when you have a constitutional monarchy where everything must go through Parliament. So instead of pointing fingers at King Charles, let's take it to Parliament first, and then we'll see what happens. All right. So until very, very soon, take care of yourself. And this is Vespera signing off.